welcome back to another episode of Operation Evil. I'm your host, Nyoka.
I'm Rachel.
And today we have a very special guest. Vikki Embry's back, part 2. We had some people follow up wanting to know a little bit more. So we're going to get some more information from Vikki. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Glad to be back.
We're happy to have you back. Your episode was very popular. I just want you to know that. Before we get started, though, I do have a really fun announcement. So we got like our first sponsored donation, which is like a big deal. Like, yay, right? And well, it's from Tyson and Julie Hermes. They donated a really nice microphone for Rachel when we are podcasting separately. She's not able to use it on this episode, but the next one that we do on Zoom, it'll be there. Her sound quality will be even better. So we're very thankful for that. Now, Tyson, he's amazing. So he's a city councilman for Erlanger. He is the owner of a commercial construction company called Hermes Construction. He's also a beekeeper, a ski instructor, and he said a fan of Operation Evil. So we thank you and Julie very, very much for just believing in us that much to sponsor us in that kind of way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Vikki, so I sent you a screenshot of this too. So someone reached out and they were like, hey, I listened to the Richard Scott episode. I listened to Vikki's episode. And if you guys haven't, go do that. That way you know the story in the background. It's just a few episodes back from this one. And this person like, I loved it. It was excellent. Maybe make it a series. They were interested in knowing more about how you navigated the legal system and justice, and you got justice for what had happened. So I wanted to bring that to your attention for something to talk about too.
Absolutely. Good.
Which I thought was a good idea because we didn't get to talk about that part of it, which is probably a long draining part.
Yes, it was. The process was a little over 2 years. And so that was really dragged out. You'd get a lot of hearings that were reset, and, you would have to like emotionally do your best and prepare yourself for a hearing. And then you go there, and it was typically his attorney, not the prosecuting office, not the attorney from the prosecuting office, but it would be his attorney wanting to reset it. They say that's pretty common. It's kind of like a tactic that if they continue to reset it, and the longer it goes, the longer the media attention is there as much, and the people in the community kind of forget. You think a 2-year process, a lot of people have kind of even forgotten about what's happened. So that intensity level and the interest is a little lower. And they had warned me in the beginning that it typically, any kind of trial like this, especially of criminal nature, is an average of 2 years before it ever goes to trial.
I did not know it took that long. That feels like a long time.
And I was glad they warned me of that in the beginning, because it was frustrating enough knowing that. And if I hadn't known that, I would have really thought, what's going on here. So, and I was just thinking about when I came back on to share, you just have no idea what the process is like, and scary and frustrating. And so that's what I thought I could talk a little bit about today. And I've lately have been watching, and I know that's so the interest in the Idaho murders, the students at the Idaho College, and I'm almost obsessed with watching it. And I tend to do this with like high profile cases like that. And I kept thinking, it was awful while they were looking for their suspect. And then a lot of people may think, well, once they find the suspect, this is kind of the end to this horrific thing, but it's really, really not. It's just the iceberg, and then it builds from that. Of course, you may feel relief when they have the suspect, just like Paul Miller. They were looking for him. It was only 3 days before they found him. But then even the investigation, and I watched some of the press conferences on that case, and the police saying, our investigation is not over. We will be continuing, because at that time they're securing all the evidence they can. They're talking to everybody they can, because then, even though it's their suspect, and then they go to they have to get charged for it, and then you start having pretrial hearings, and then they have to, it's a state's responsibility, obviously, to build their case, so this person can be convicted. So what that looked like on my end, although I was very fortunate that I had an employer that let me be off work for a few months, because I just emotionally was not ready to go back to work, and especially the kind of job that I worked with kids abused and neglected in the court system, and that's heavy enough as it is. And so when I did go back to work and really thought I was ready and thought I needed the distraction, that's when it really started amping up the getting ready. We would start going to trial hearings. And there's so much that has to be done before you could ever get to trial. Like, it's not like on TV where, boom, they're in jail and then you go to trial and it's over. It's nothing like that. So it was almost like, I would say to my friends, I felt like I had a part-time job, because I would often have to meet the detectives at my house that I no longer lived in, never moved back to that home. And I would have to be there, and I'd have to sign papers every time that I was willfully letting them go into my house. And they would go in there and they'd be collecting more evidence, and they could spend, 30 minutes one time, and they may be in there hours the next. And I would just be sitting there in a house that I didn't want to be in. Sometimes I'd sit outside on the porch, because, just the memories of it and the sadness that, this was once my home, and it felt like my home, and the place I thought I'd spend the rest of my life raising my kids with my husband. Now it was a crime scene. And that's all, the only way I could see it was a crime scene. And just watching them collect evidence, and it was eerie, and it was surreal. And I was just like, this is not my life. Like, it was just like I was having these dreams over and over, and I just wasn't waking up from them. And then as we started getting closer to hoping we were going to get to trial, like I said, and this was months in, and we weren't close, but that's always your hope. I would have to meet, they would start kind of preparing me for trial, and I'd have to meet in the prosecutor's office, and it would usually be me, one woman, in a room full of men. And I don't know how to say this, and I'm just going to be honest and pretty honest and vocal about it. I know they had a job to do, and some was good to me. He was good to my family, my children. He was empathetic. I felt like he was thorough, but there were some other ones I dealt with that were not. They were not empathetic. They were almost accusatory, and it was hard. It was hurtful, and you almost feel like you're being victimized all over again. And a lot of times it was their case, and I was reminded that a lot by the prosecuting attorney. This is the state's case. It's not your case. That's, I know he had to separate that, and he had to do his job as a Commonwealth attorney, but that's my husband. So I would have to remind him, I do have an interest in this, and I am going to ask a lot of questions, and I am going to press, because that's my husband. And you may want justice because it's your job, but I want justice because it's my loved one. So there were sometimes heated arguments. You didn't always feel like you were on the same side. And some of that process, I'll take ownership, was maybe me being naive to it. Because for one thing, I thought I'd be able to know all the evidence that was against him, and I would be able to know how everything unfolded, and I wasn't. To this day, there's evidence I don't know.
I didn't
Um,
realize that. I
it,
thought you would have that knowledge too.
no, and the reason being, and again, it's not like on TV, but the reason being, because I would have to be a witness in the case. They told me that if they let me know any, if they let me know like details of the evidence, and then I was to get in trial testify, the defense could use that against us and say that I testified according to the evidence they had found.
Oh,
And and it also got a little stickier, because this man's family started accusing me of, first they tried to say I don't know if y'all ever heard of it. It was a thing. I don't think it's as popular now. Thank God it isn't because it's an awful site, but it's called Topics,
No.
Topis.
Oh, yes. It was kind of like a neighborhood community group kind of thing.
Yes, Rachel. But what was so bad, there was no screening on that. There was no like you'd be shut down if you were saying hateful things or, anything like that. So anybody could go on there and say anything about you. And his family, his aunts, and people I didn't even know and out of state were saying awful things, saying I was a drug addict, saying I abused my kids, saying I had an affair with Paul and that I wanted him to kill my husband. Then it switched to
That's terrible.
I framed Paul, and that the police found out that I took all this money out of account like days before to hire a hitman, and none of that was true. And the police knew that wasn't true. But here I am, like people in the community could read this, and even me. We talked on the last time. I think that some of us have an interest in crime stories, and just I don't think it means we're morbid or anything. It's just almost like it's a world you're like, wow, I can't imagine if what would I do if I was in this situation? What would that be like? And there's a curiosity and there's an empathy, and I had those same interests. And then when I found myself in this situation in real life, I was like, wow, it's not anything. I never dreamed it would be like this. And then, you know, the worst trauma was finding my husband from such a heinous murder, and the second trauma, worst trauma, was being accused of it by the man who did its family, and that was hard. And I wanted to fight back. I wanted to say things. I wanted to defend myself, and I was told not to. They said so. We had to always. I was always being reminded of the defendant's rights. Well, if we say anything or you say anything, it'll look like we're attacking him, and they can use that against us. Or if you say something, they can twist it around. So they drove by my house, honking their horns, screaming things out. One time they threw something that looked like a piece of my husband's clothing out in my front yard. And I would go to the county attorney's office, and normally, you can go to your county attorney's office and you can file a complaint for harassment. And that was my right as a citizen to do that. And the county attorney knew I had the right to do it. But when he talked to the prosecuting attorney and when we're attacking him, so I did not even have the rights at that time to protect myself and my children from more harm from these people. Frustration I had was his rights were more important than mine.
That's what it seems like.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And it was awful. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. And so I didn't know the evidence. I was finding out that his family knew some more of the evidence than I did. And there would be times that they would tell me enough to just, I guess, kind of give me some security that they had a good case. And they would say things like, we have a lot of DNA, we have this and that, but details. Or they'd ask me questions or start pursuing another route in the investigation, which would kind of lead me to be like, oh, okay. But as far as specifics, now I can, under open case laws, I can get that information now. I've never done that. Here it's been 12 years. And if I write my book, I probably will. And I think some of it is I'm afraid to do it. One thing the lead detective told my sister, and she was kind of the go between during all this. My sister lived in Alabama, moved back home, and lived with me for a while just to help me through this process. And he told my sister when I was wanting to get the open case after it all finished at the end, he said, some things are better left not to know. And I think she'd be better off not doing that. And he sent me a message and encouraged me not to do that. And it's kind of haunted me. And he told my sister out of his 16 years of being a detective, it was the most strange case he'd ever worked. And he retired not long after that. He told my sister it was really hard on him. And he had an 8-year-old son at the time. And he would work hours and hours on this case and go home and look at his son and think of how close my children were to danger with this man. So that's a lot of the emotional side. And then you just have the frustration of the system. We would be prepared, and prosecute and be prepared. And I would literally have to psych myself up because every time I go to these trial hearings, and it could be one or two a month, I'd have to see that man. He'd come out in his orange suit and he'd be shackled, and he would always look my way, and then he'd look towards his family, and then he wouldn't look away anymore. But I would glare at him. Like I wanted him to feel my eyes pierce through him. And after seeing him, I would have days I had to recuperate from that. I would have nightmares about him. I would think he was coming after me and my children. My sister had a full-blown anxiety attack the first time she sat in there with me and saw him. I went to the bathroom to check on her because she was having an anxiety attack, just the thought of seeing him. I would have to hear his attorney stand in court and say, well, can we access her phone records, her checking account? He claims he even would file motions. The judge had to finally get on to him and say, you had legal counsel. And he would get on to the legal counsel, like, why is he filing all these motions? Miss Embry is not on trial. But he was trying to, it was almost like, I think he knew because we found out he was a law clerk in prison, even though he said he was an ordained minister, is what he told me and my husband, but he was a law clerk. I think he knew enough to what he could do to play around with the system. But I think he also knew it wasn't going to work. But I feel like it was another way of him to just terrorize me. And it was awful. There would be arguments. One time I got on the elevator and his mom and stepdad and some other family got on the elevator, and I thought we were going to duke it out right there on the elevator. So from then on, a bailiff had to escort me upstairs. So not only was I going through this trial hearing process, I was dealing with his family who were not the nicest people. So it consumed so much of my life. And so here I would go back to work and trying to just be, before my life, I was just an average citizen like anybody else. Nothing real exciting in my life. And then I would try to go back to being what I was before, to be the mother I was, the sister I was, the friend, because my mind was so consumed by all of this. And it was traumatic. I'd go to work and I couldn't think. I couldn't get my mind straight. Sometimes I would drive. I'd run red lights because I was just all this stuff was racing through my head. And it would always center around these times I would have to sit in these hearings. So when I watched this press conference and with the police in Idaho and them saying, this is just beginning, and I thought, I feel so bad for those families because, people don't know until you go through it. It's a horrible process. And you almost think, oh, you're going to enjoy it because you're going to see justice, but it's really not like that. And then even hearing them say horrible things about my husband. I mean, they'll do anything, right, to try to get some. It seems like there's nothing too low that they won't go. And then we had to ride the high horse, and so that was a very difficult part of the process.
I didn't even it didn't even cross my mind of dealing with Paul's family. Like that didn't even cross my mind. You had to see them every single time.
Yes.
And here they were slandering you and your husband and just trying to make him look better, trying to create doubt or something. That's awful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they would laugh. They would snicker at me. It was, you might see on TV sometimes where you see a victim's family get angry in the courtroom and lash out. I had a friend one time, or acquaintance more, so to speak, we're all in a room and watching TV, and they said, that person's crazy. And I'm like, no, they're not crazy. The whole process drives you crazy. And you have so many emotions. And I had a fear of doing that one day. I'm like, I'm just going to lose it in here one day. But we had a pretty strict judge that was like, listen, if that happens in here, you'll be out of this courtroom and won't come back. And there was no way I was going to let that happen. I never missed a hearing in 2 years. It didn't matter if I had to go by myself. I never missed a hearing. And I wanted him to know. And sometimes I would go and his family wouldn't be there because, that's another thing. If people are working, you don't think about the time they have to take off work. I was lucky that I worked near the courthouse. I could go and my the nonprofit I worked for was very good and let me take the time to do that. But some people wouldn't have that. And I can't imagine not being able to be there, even though the process is painful, but you want to be there for your loved one.
I would
And
have been so relieved every time his family couldn't be
I
there.
know,
Oh,
I know, I was. So I was trying to think of some really odd things that happened throughout the process. The the best that I can talk about it as far as what I was allowed to know. But there was one time, um, it was really strange, and they were going back to my house again, and they were taking another sweep through the house to look for the weapon. And so if you think about it at first, so there's an autopsy done, and this was in Louisville, and the examiner was not sure what the weapon was. So she kept working on that. So it's kind of hard to look for a weapon when you don't know what the weapon was, right?
right.
We kept a baseball bat by our bed. And so in my head, I thought it was the baseball bat, but it wasn't. Um, so then the examiner finally, and I don't know how long it took. I'm terrible about the time frames because to me, everything felt like it took months and it could have been weeks. But she finally narrowed it down to she was pretty sure it was a hammer. And they also had him on video, I think the night before he did this with my kids in Walmart, and he was buying things and they couldn't tell what, but I think it ended up they found out a hammer was one of the things that he purchased. So when they know, they're going through my house, and of course the first question they asked me, did you have a hammer? Well, of course we had a hammer. So I told them, so they have to ask me questions that they know is going to be presented in court, right? So a lot of times the questions they ask me standing in my home would make me feel like, oh my God, they suspect me now. But that's not what they were doing now that I'm on the other side of it. But they wanted to know how I would answer and what they could say in court. So they were like, what does your hammer look like? I don't, a lot of people, I've had people say, I wouldn't know what my hammer looked. It looked like a hammer.
Right.
But it was fortunate. I said, well, we had a hammer and it was kind of had this leather part on the bottom where you hold on to it, and it was even torn a little bit. And I just remember it because when I would use it, it was rough. And I remember saying to Scott, "Where'd you get this hammer?" Because I never saw a hammer that had like this leather wrapped around the bottom of it. So that was helpful for us, right? Because the hammer they ended up finding looked nothing like that hammer.
Oh.
So they found our hammer, and they would go through the garage, and so you know I guess they're trying to find out then obviously they have to do and send off to the labs if this is the hammer that was used. So this particular day, and a lot of people may say it's a coincidence. I don't think so at all. I almost feel like if these things didn't fall in place like they did, it would have really looked bad on my part, like that I did have something to do with his murder. And I always felt like just God just protected me that day. That my sister and she went with me that day, and they admitted to me what the weapon was and what they were looking for. And so while they were looking, I would have to ask because I couldn't just roam throughout my home, right? So I said, listen, my kids need more clothes. Can I go down in the laundry room and get some of their clothes? Because I had clean clothes still from the week before all this happened in a laundry basket. So they said, sure. And some of them were in the basement. They'd come in with an evidence collection team, maybe 4 or 6 guys. So I'm downstairs doing that, and Detective Payne's down there with us. That he would usually go with me, make sure I'm not, I guess, contaminating anything or messing up anything. And he's one of the guys hollered from upstairs and said, "You need to come up here. We found something." So we all just rush upstairs, and this guy's standing in my living room, and he's got his plastic bag and his gloves on, and there's a shiny new looking hammer. And he looks at me, this police officer, and says, "This was under your couch. Why was this under your couch? Almost like I felt like he thought I put it there. And I was like, I have no idea. I've never seen that hammer. That's not our hammer. I've already described what our hammer looked like. I don't know. And he goes, we swiped this whole room. This hammer was not here,
Oh my
but now it
God.
is. So that would look suspicious, right? And I'm
Right.
looking at my sister and literally I'm trembling because I'm like, what is going on? And he actually is getting a little more forceful in questioning me. And the detective's just kind of standing there. And then I got pretty assertive back. Let's just say that. And so we're like going at it. And then this man walks out of the bedroom where my husband was murdered. And he looked real like he just saw a ghost. He was white as a ghost. And he called, I think, if my memory serves me correct, some of this gets fuzzy, but called the detective aside. And he was with, and I don't mean to say anything that sounds too graphic or gruesome, but he was with a company that cleans up after something like this happens. And he was in there working on the bedroom. I think he was painting at that time. The worst part had been done. And he admitted when he was in the living room that, I can't remember how he said it, they moved the couch and it was down under the cushion and he just put it under the couch when he moved it back.
Oh,
my God.
wow.
And I don't think he even knew what he was in there for. Like, I don't think he knew exactly what happened in that room. And I don't
So
even think he
had
was
no
the first
clue.
person that was in there. Yeah. So if he had not been there to come out and say, oh, whoa, 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 I hear y'all arguing, I did that. And he didn't know what, I mean, he was an innocent thing. He didn't know, I don't think he even knew. And it seemed like he was a younger guy that even knew this was, I don't even know if he knew it was a crime scene. I really don't know the details of that. So they took his statement, and I mean, they had to take a detailed statement from him. Poor guy. He was a nervous wreck. And it was like, wow, that was such an intense moment. So when I have, on one hand, his family accusing me of these things, and me even wondering, are people in the community going to believe this? Like, are the police going to believe it? Are jurors going to believe it? I started having nightmares at night that I ended up going to prison, that they thought I had something to do with it, that he was found innocent, and then they had a trial against me. Like, it was awful. So, you just start imagining all these things that can happen to you. So that day I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to go to jail. Like, they think, and I understand why they were like, we know this hammer was not under the couch. And if no one else had been in that house but me and them, how else would it got there? So that was a really odd, scary moment. That just, it's just another part of it. You're just like, I cannot believe this is happening.
That is terrifying. I would have been
So,
like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get arrested right now. And I didn't even do
mhm,
anything.
mhm.
It's sad that family members are looked at first. That's in their minds. It's sad.
Right,
You were
right.
even out of town when this happened, right?
Yeah, and they did a lot, and there again, that was me being naive. I think they did a lot of things to solidify where I was at, and I was like, well, if I'm not a suspect, why are you having to do this? And they're like,
Right.
because we'll have to do it in trial, and I knew that, I think, but when it's happened to you personally in real life, you're kind of like, ah. And I was out of town for a conference. I did not stay at the hotel where my other board members were at. I stayed with my best friend. She's still my best friend this day in Louisville. And they even interviewed her. She had an alarm system, and they were like, because his family was claiming that someone said that I told someone that I left in the middle of the night and I came to Owensboro. I mean, their story would change weekly though. So they checked out her alarm system, how it was set up, and how the alarm, if I would have gotten out of her house, the alarm would have registered. She had these like infrared lights that went across her living room. If you went through it and didn't turn the alarm off, it would have done something. So they had to really, do all of that as well to just kind of dismiss anything. They didn't have any idea, what they were going to say in trial, to dismiss any of that stuff that could have came up. So even though I wasn't under investigation, so to speak, it felt like it. I was like, when I was accused of that, I may have had money and I paid a hitman to frame Paul. And I was like, I wish I had that kind of money, but I don't. And you can look at every bank account I have and you can see, and the police are like, that's going to be an easy one, that there was no withdrawal made and things like that. So it was just, they tried to host press conferences with the media. One time my sister didn't even want to tell me because it had been a really bad week for me. And she went down the street, and his mom lived right 2 blocks over from us. That's where he was living when this happened. And she drove by the house and saw like media vans and stuff there. And she was like, oh my gosh. And, and then like when the media tried to contact me the next day, I said, if you're talking to that woman, I don't want to talk to you. And if you're going to run something, and I told them, I will get you for slander, because I was that concerned that, if the media ran with some of this crazy stuff this woman was saying, his mother, and they were like, oh no, we're not running anything. We could tell within 5 minutes she was a little cuckoo. So, that was literally their words. So thankfully, they were never in the media, and we never had to deal with any of that part.
Were you able to go after them later for slander?
I did end up talking to an attorney because it continued throughout the 2 years. And I don't know if I told y'all this on the last podcast, but while Paul Miller was in jail, he wrote a letter to the state director of the organization I worked for. Did I say that in the last podcast?
I don't
I
think
don't
so.
think so.
Okay. Paul Miller from the jail cell wrote a letter to our state director saying, here's this woman. She's director of a nonprofit for abusing neglected children, and she abuses her children. He said I was physically violent with my husband. He said I was on drugs. I mean, he made all these accusations, and it was so strange. I think it was like a 2-page letter, and then he starts just ranting in the letter, almost like not making sense. The state director called me personally, and I could tell he was just hated to tell me this. And he said, Vikki, I got to tell you this. And the reason I'm even sharing it with you, I wouldn't even tell you, is I had to take it to my board because I didn't know what was going to come of this. And then our attorneys had to look at it. And now the prosecuting attorney in Owensboro is looking at it. And he was like, I just want to let you know what's going on. And I'm like, oh my gosh, he is trying to get me fired. I mean, I'm a widow now, 2 kids to raise. This job was my passion. Loved the organization I worked for, what I was doing. I was like, now he's going after my job. So I told them I will take a hair follicle test. I will take any drug test you want. You can interview my kids, and they were like, it's not necessary, Vikki. We know he's crazy. When all that went down, the prosecutor was like, Vikki, you cannot retaliate. And he knew I was going to be mad. And he was like, I said, why does he keep getting by with this? This is slander, it's defamation of character. And I did go to an attorney and for like a consultation. But here's the thing, again, other things we don't think about. We think that's so easy. But in order to really, if I remember correctly how he explained it, to have a case for slander or defamation of character, you have to show that you have a loss, like that it hurt your career or your job. So yeah, if I got fired, I would have had a case. But because I could not prove that I had, I guess, like a financial loss or loss of, say, like if you had clients or customers, and I'm like, what about your mental state of going through that?
Right.
I even had an incident. I didn't like to go out a lot after this happened, especially when it was in the news. I didn't want to run into people that knew me. I just wanted to kind of hide away. And I always had this in my head that people were talking about me in the community. And I don't know that most people said, no, they're not, Vikki. They don't believe these people, that they feel bad for you. They're supportive. but in your mind, you think worst case scenario. And I would think, people's going to not like me or they're going to think I had something to do with it. So I just kind of didn't get out a lot. And finally, I went to get my hair done. It looked hideous. And my hairdresser was like, I can take, they were so kind to me. They were like, we can take you in the back room. You don't have to be around people. Because you know how salons are. They're usually opened up. And Owensboro's not a real big town. And it was in the media all the time. So they were so kind to me. And I was actually having a good afternoon. And I was laughing with my hairdresser that I just loved. I mean, we were friends. And people at work there coming to me, give me a hug. We're here for you. We're supportive. And while I'm waiting for my hair to process, I hear this woman out there and say, "Did y'all see in the paper?" And that woman had something to do with that, or she had an affair with that man, because she's talking about the case. And my hairstylist just looked at me like, "Oh my God." And I just said, "Let me up." She's like, "Vikki, don't go out there." And I'm like, "Oh yes, I'm going out there." And it wasn't pretty. I mean, and I went up to her and I said, "Do you know those people? Did you know Scott Embry?" And she's like, "No." "Do you know his wife?" "No, but I mean, it's obvious." I said, "Well, you don't know," and I won't say exactly how I said it on here. I was like, "Well, you don't know," and that was my husband. I'm the woman you're talking about. And her mouth fell open. And I was like, she said, "I'm so sorry." I said, "No, you're not. Are you don't sit in there in public and talk about things that you don't know anything about. It's hurtful. And what if you were in this situation?" And bless her heart, that lady took the brunt of what I've been going through for months. I probably lashed it all out on her that day. I kind of regret that, but it was just, I can only imagine. And I even, I keep going back to these Idaho murders, but I want to say this, and I want to say this to the public. I've even said this on TikTok because I went on TikTok and saw how all these people were trying to solve this crime, and they were accusing the ex-boyfriend and they were accusing the roommates. And, I know we all have questions, and that's normal. And it's normal for us to speculate and have questions. But when you go out there on a social media platform like that and accuse people when you do not know the full facts of this case, the police, and then when they're like, "Oh, the police don't know what they're doing. They don't have any lead. They're not going to catch this guy." I knew because I'd experienced it. They're not going to tell them one lead they have. They're not going to talk about it. It will hurt their case, or it could lead, they may have been wanting to watch him to see what he's doing. If he knew they were onto him, he's going to have a low profile, whatever. So, but, I even, was like, why are they doing this to these people? These poor girls are traumatized. They lived with people that were murdered, and now they're somehow being accused of doing something wrong. And we don't know what trauma does to people. It may seem unusual that somebody waits for hours to call 911, but until you're in that situation, trauma, your brain shuts down because it's a protective. And I've learned a lot about trauma since then. Been involved with trauma informed care when it comes to like abused children. But your brain has to almost literally shut down to process what it just saw or what it just went through. And so you're not going to think rationally. It's just, you're just not. You're coming from a traumatic situation and just trying to process information. And that's why a lot of people, when you see, yes, flashbacks of what you saw or what happened, it's almost like your brain. And I went to counseling for PTSD, but it's like your brain gets stuck on the trauma and it just stays there. And I always said it was like a movie reel going and going, and mine would just keep going and be stuck on that. So, like earlier when I said I tried to be a mom and a daughter and a sister and a friend, it was almost like I was in the shell of that and trying to go through the motions of it, but I wasn't really there and present. It just, and it took time to get there, and a lot of healing and support from people, and my faith. I mean, there would just be days that I would just pray and say, I don't know that I can go through another day hurting this bad and not sleeping and having nightmares and feeling hopeless that I'm ever going to be normal again. Or I would always think, how am I going to damage my kids? Um, and you find something to grasp and hold on to, and I would have people praying for me. I mean, I remember one time, I can't remember who sent it to me on Facebook, but they listed all these churches that knew my story, and they were having like prayer vigils.
No.
Um, and my church I went to rented a house for me and my kids to live in for a year.
Oh, that's amazing.
We had nowhere to go, and I had a house that I was still making payments on, and I couldn't sell it because all this was going on. It's still a crime scene. So those are the things that I think that you just don't realize what happens behind the scenes that's so hard as you're navigating that system.
I think the public forgets that these people going through things like you, they're real people. They're not fictional.
Mm-hmm.
They're not these characters in a movie. Like, these are real people going through real experiences, and they're just being the keyboard warriors.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're exactly right. And I don't want to say it in a horrible judgment, because I can't say I haven't been there. I mean, I know I would see, like, you see these wives that disappear, and I mean, the first thing that would come through my head was, oh, I wonder if her husband did it, or oh, you think of those things, and a lot of times in the cases it is the spouse, right?
True. Yeah.
So I can't say I've never done that. So I don't want. I think it's when you take it to that other level and you're so public about it and attacking people when you just don't know. I'm not going to go on national TV and tell that. So
yeah,
everyone speculates, and it can be damaging. And I just, keyboard warriors is a good way to put it. Is that, be careful. You can hide behind a screen, but you don't know how every stroke of that key can penetrate someone's heart and just hurt them and scar them even more than what they're already scarred.
You can't really base a decision or an opinion on what you see in the media. You just
right.
Let me ask you this. So taking you back to court, in the courtroom, on the final day, I'm sure you were there on the final day of sentencing. Did you get to say anything to him? And how did that feel?
Well, that was another injustice on my part that happened to me. I was told I would get to. My stepsons prepared a statement something to read. We were all prepared for it. And the day of, the two attorneys, the Commonwealth attorney and his attorney, are up there talking to the judge. And he accepted the plea, 40-something years. And next thing I know, it's done. And I'm looking at the detective like I'm whispering to him, like, when do we go up there? And he's just looking at me like, I don't know. And so I noticed the Commonwealth attorney walks by. He doesn't give me eye contact, and he's going out the side door like, show's over. And I'm looking at my family, and we're just like in shock. So I was upset, and I followed him down the hall, and I'm like, what is going on? And he said, we're not going to do a victim statement.
Why?
Yeah, I was like, why? And he said, because I've seen this happen. This is what can happen. When they make a plea like that, they don't want to deal with that. They don't want to hear what you have to say. They don't want their family to hear it. Yeah. Yeah. And he was like, so if we upset him by doing that, he may withdraw from that plea.
This makes me so angry.
I know. But, other people do it all the time. And I'm like, okay, if that's what typically you think happens, and why are all these other people get to do it? And I just was like, I cannot believe you're taking this from us. And he was like, well, what's most important is he's going to prison and we won this case. And in my mind, and I don't know, maybe legally there's something I don't know, but if you're that far in the process and someone goes up there and makes a victim statement, is he really able to withdraw it at that time? I don't know. I find that hard to believe. Um, I even thought the judge looked a little taken back, like, we're not doing this. And I feel like he knew, the Commonwealth attorney, I feel like he knew when he went in there that it wasn't going to happen and didn't tell us.
Now, I don't know the law or anything either, but come on, you go through 2 years of this madness dealing with his family and them saying stuff to you and giving you the evil eye or whatever. You go through all this, seeing him every time, and you expect at the end to be able to say something to him. That is so wrong.
It was wrong. I think if it was a husband or a father or another, I wonder if it'd be different. I almost feel like, I hate to say it like that, like just bullied, or they could get by with it. Or there was one time, I was even asked, now I know you probably wouldn't want to admit this in court. And again, they were doing their job. I know that. But if you had an affair with him, now's the time to tell us, because that could be a motive. And the jurors are going to look for a motive. Jurors want a motive, even though there's not always a motive. Some people, I remember when the detective said, there's not always a motive. Jurors want a motive, but some people do it because they're just evil. And I let them know, again, the only woman in a room full of men looking at me when that question was asked of me. It's embarrassing. It's hurtful. And I said, I can tell you one thing. I'm not here to protect myself for anything. I'm here for justice, and that is all I want. And if I was having an affair with that piece of crap, I would tell you, because, like you said, it would be a motive and it would probably help the case. I'm not going to lie about it, and I wasn't, but if I was, I wouldn't keep that from you. But I said, but you know what's scary? If you don't believe me, how are jurors going to believe me?
Yeah.
And, the attorney just looked at me. He didn't have any words. And the detective walked me out, and I was crying. I was emotional. And I looked at him and I said, he would carry his file, this big, thick file of all his reports and evidence. And I said, that big, thick file you have there, do you have one thing in that file that makes you think I had an affair with that man? He said, absolutely not. Not one thing. And that saved me that day, because that was another blow. It was just like, wow, I'm here trying to fight for justice for my husband. And it's like, it felt like a punishment, every time I walked in that room to deal with it. But then there were, that's hard. That was hard times. But then there was times that were just beautiful, where people supported you, or where I just felt like God showed up and just protected me and my children. And probably the hardest day I had, when we were preparing for trial, and the detective was very sensitive about it. And he said, Vikki, you're going to do one of the hardest things you're going to have to do. You're going to listen to your 911 call today. And he said, it's very traumatic for people when they listen to it, but we have to prepare you, because when you go to court, they're going to play it, and you're going to have to, we want to prepare you now, which makes sense. You don't want the first time you hear it to be in court. And they put me in a room by myself, right outside the attorney's office, and they played this tape, and I didn't know who that person was. I was so in shock. I couldn't understand myself. I didn't know what I was saying. I was screaming for help. I was calling out to God. I was calling out to my mom. I was just hollering his name. And it just, it made it all just again feel like a nightmare. I was like, this can't be true. Um, and so I was so emotional. They checked on me and they asked me if I wanted to take a break, and I said yes. And it was in May, and it happened to be the National Day of Prayer. And some friends of mine that had been addicts were speaking at National Day of Prayer on the old courthouse lawn, and it was walking distance. Beautiful spring day, and so, and we were 2 weeks out from going to trial, and hopefully nobody will see me. I'm going to stand in the back, and I'm just going to go and be uplifted. I need that right now. So I walked down there by myself. There's a big shade tree, and I just kind of stood behind it, and I listened to these people pray, and I listened to people tell their story of deliverance from drugs and triumphant and um, just victory. And they were beautiful stories. And I was so scared at that time because they were telling me, again, I felt like his rights came before ours, that my daughters were going to have to testify. They were going to have to be in the same room with him. So I was trying to prepare my daughters. I'd go home and talk to them, and they would cry. They'd be scared, and they didn't want to be in the room with him. So I went back and I said, instead of doing that, can we have like them be on camera? And they don't understand that they're going to sit in a room. They're 6 and 10 years old. But police will be there. A bailiff will be there. But I couldn't even be there for them because I was not even going to be allowed to sit in the courtroom, I was told, during the trial, except when I went in to testify.
Oh.
So I wasn't even going to get to be able to be present through the whole trial. So I was so worried about my kids, and my mother-in-law kept saying, Vicki, we just can't go to trial. They're going to run us through the mud. The kids, you can't go through it. They can't go through it. She lived out of state. His family didn't live here, so they didn't go to most of the hearings. And she said, I'm just going to pray and pray and pray. We don't go to trial and that he pleads. And I'm like, he's not going to plead. And even the detectives didn't think he would. And even though most cases don't go to trial, there usually is a plea, they said. But he was so stubborn. He said he was going to take the stand. So that day at National Day of Prayer, behind that tree, I just called out to God and I said, you know what? I can't take it anymore. I can't do it. I don't want my kids to go through this, and I need some help. And I don't feel like these attorneys are giving it. I I I feel like we're just lost. And I just feel like I was in a boat out at sea, and there was no sight of land anymore. And I just cried and cried out to him. And I kid you not, I have to walk back. They were all going to lunch, and the attorneys and the detectives, and obviously I didn't want to go to lunch with them or felt like eating. And so the hour was up and I had to walk back. And when I went back in the office, I found a room full of men pacing back and forth, and I could tell something was going on. And I was like, what's going on? And they're not telling me anything at first, as usual. I even had to step out of the room, and the attorney made a phone call, and I could hear him talking. I don't know how much time passed. It seemed like a while, and I'm sitting out there with his secretary. They let me come back in the room, and they're like, his attorney just called Vicki, and he wants to cop a plea. And it first was 20 years. And I said, absolutely not. And some of them tried to talk me into taking it. I said, I'm not taking it. I mean, this man murdered my husband. He took away a father from children, a husband, a son to his parent. No, absolutely not. I mean, people might get 20 years for drug dealing. He took someone's life. Um, I felt there was some more coercion, almost like, well, all it takes is one juror to not find him guilty. And again, I feel like the lead detective saved the day. I looked at him and I said again, pointing to his file, do you feel like you have a strong case? Because I didn't know all the evidence, right? I said, I don't know. You can't tell me the evidence. And I was upset. Do you have a strong case? And he said, I feel like we have a very strong case. It's solid. I said, then I don't take the plea. We'll
Good
take our
for
chances.
you.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't care. They said, well, what are they? They're going to say things about you. And at that point, I didn't care how they dragged my name through the mud. I didn't care what they said about me. I wanted justice, and I wanted more than 20 years. And I wasn't going to do that to Scott. So we said no, and they called back, and I don't think it was very long. I don't remember the time frame, but then that's when they came back for 40 something years. And I called his mom in Alabama and said, "Are you comfortable with taking that?" I didn't want it to just be my decision. I mean, that was our son. And she said, "I'm good with that. Then we don't have to go through all this." And so, and I know beyond a doubt that that was an answer to prayer that day behind that tree. I mean, I was just like, we had no idea that was going to happen that day. They were, there was, I don't think there'd even been talk about it. So, or if there was, I didn't know. I guess I can't say that. But so.
Sounds like a miracle to me.
Yeah.
It saved the kids from going through that too.
Right.
Yeah. Did you feel an instant relief? Like
I did feel a relief. Yes. You also just feel like a numbness, but the only thing, you get to these points and you think, well, when I get to there, just like I was saying earlier, you think, okay, when they're arrested, you feel a sense of relief because they're arrested, right? Mm-hmm. And then you go through another thing and you have to climb that mountain, and there's another one. I did feel relief, but it's still, you expect it to feel better than what it feels. Does that make sense?
Yes, it totally makes sense.
I think so, because you're in your head, you're expecting him to have like life.
Yeah.
And suffer.
Yeah. He couldn't even get life because in Kentucky you have to have 2 capital crimes like rape and murder, burglary and murder, or is it armed robbery? He did steal some things, but it didn't. Maybe it's armed robbery. So
wow, I did not know this either.
He couldn't even get life. So
some things just don't make sense to me. Like, it's that's kind of disturbing.
Yes. That law needs to change.
Yeah, the justice system's broken on some things for sure.
Right.
Wow.
But I guess what I was trying to say, you think that'll be closure for you. And it is a step. I mean, you finally can let go of that process and be done with it and then try to get on with your life. But I think you just anticipate you're going to feel better, almost like that's going to be this miraculous, okay, I'm gonna feel better about this situation. And it's still, the pain is still there. And it's not the complete closure you think you'll get. It's just nothing. I think time is the only thing, that might sound like a corny cliche. We hear time heals. It doesn't heal everything, but sometimes I do think it just takes time, and sometimes a very long time to get to that.
After he took the plea, did his family stop slandering you?
Pretty much so. I think there were a few little incidents. They even tried to reach out to my daughter when she was older on social media and say things to her. But
do they think that he
do what? Sorry.
Do they think that he's innocent, that he didn't do it?
Well, yes, they claim that. His sister didn't. And she knew some of the crimes that we didn't even know that he had done, like one to a child. She didn't even trust him around her own grandchildren. She wasn't thrilled when he got out of prison. She was surprised that Scott and I let him into our lives, but see, she thought we knew everything, and we didn't. And his mom didn't tell everything. So it did, it slowed down. And I was even called later, years later. His mom was dying of cancer, and his sister, well, it wasn't years later, it's probably only a couple years after this. And his sister said, if my mom wants to ask forgiveness from you on her deathbed, would you grant it to her? And I think that his sister wanted her mom to do that. I think she was maybe pushing her mom to that. I think she wanted her to leave this world with a clear conscience and a better heart than what she had. And the angry, hurt flesh side of me was no, I don't owe that woman anything. The side of me that I thought should be Christ like was like, yes, I should. And I told her it'd take a couple days for me to think about it. And she had contacted me under a fake account on Facebook, and I messaged her back, and I said, if your mom was to talk to me, I'll see her. And she said, well, she doesn't. And she said she won't do it. And I was like, okay, she will leave this world on her terms then.
Mm-hmm.
And
It's
I
on.
didn't feel bad about it then. I was willing to do my part. And I tried to always look at it from other people's perspective. I mean, that was her child. Who wants to think your son would do something like that? But I think the
True.
difference in a one-time thing is a son that's done things most of his life. By then, you think you had a clue. But I don't know. That was her path to take, I guess, and not mine. But
That was yeah, that's something. It's just a whole nother factor of things I just didn't even consider with the other family members.
yeah,
So
and,
how are you these days? With all this time that's passed,
mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't
I'm pretty good. I mean, I look back now and I still have moments just like you talking about it tonight, and I'll be okay. It's not like where it'll haunt me for days. I'm not there anymore. But now when I talk about it, it's like I know it happened, but then a part of it's like, did that really happen? Is that really what we all went through?
yeah.
Because in that moment, I never thought I would have a day of laughter again. Didn't know if I could ever open my heart to love someone again, if I could ever trust someone again, if I'd be a good mother again. I mean, you just feel hopeless that your life will ever be on some kind of level of normal. And so, and I am to that. I mean, my friends may say different, like you're so crazy, but there's a woman, and I try to help women, um, widowed women, and I have a lot of people that refer women to me. And there's a woman I make contact from the Louisville area, and she lost her daughter and her daughter's boyfriend. They were killed in a car accident by a drunk driver, and he just went to trial. And I'm not going to use their names or anything. And she's really having a hard time with the anger and the whole trial process. I mean, she's been through it. And she works with my friend in Louisville, my best friend, and my best friend called me one night and said, could you reach out to this woman? Because we can't help her on the level you can. And so I've never met her in person yet. We're planning on doing that. But I talked to her on the phone some. We message back and forth. And she's there. I mean, she'll say days like, will I ever be normal again? I said, it's a new normal. That's what they'll tell you in the grief world. Your life is forever changed. And I will never sugarcoat that for anybody. I mean, because it's the truth. But I said, you will get back to a new normal without her. And you'll get through this process, and it'll be difficult, and it'll take time and healing, and it takes work. I mean, you have to work at it, whether it be therapy, journaling, having those supportive people to talk to, self-evaluating daily. You have to find out what you need to get through it, because a lot of people could decide not, and some people do. I knew another woman that lost her husband to a heart attack, natural causes, and her friends called me, didn't know me, but they knew my situation and said, she's drinking 2 bottles of wine every night. She's not taking care of her kids. And they were wanting to call social services. They were upset with her. And here I worked in that field, and I was like, cut her some slack, get her some help, don't get her kids. I mean, she's numbing the pain.
Right.
She's trying to numb the pain just one day. And it doesn't work that way. But, so anyone can turn to anything. And I'm not saying I'm a better person because I didn't do that. I do believe that God protected me from that because I believe me, there was times I thought, I got to find something to do today to not feel this and think about this all day long. But so it's just finding out how to get through it, and that makes me feel good that I can share that with people. And not that my story's the worst story. There's worse stories out there, and I don't compare it. I think we talked about the last podcast. I don't like to compare my journey to others. A lot of people will say to me when they hear my story, "Oh my gosh, I didn't go through anything like you," especially widows, and if they lost, their spouse, usually the natural causes or maybe a car accident. Well, I didn't lose my husband, something horrific, and I was like, but that doesn't matter. You lost your spouse. You lost someone you love. That's your grief, your loss, your journey. I don't compare those. But I do think my story, I don't claim that it's worse than theirs, but because it's so different and on a different level, maybe, that when I can share it, they can look at me, not me like, oh, I'm better, but they can look at my story and my life and be like, if she can get through this, then I'm going to be able to get to the other side one day.
I
And it
agree.
gives them some hope.
Yeah, I think you're definitely an inspiration, and I'm glad that you're able to help other people.
Well, I do it for selfish reasons too. I do it because it helps me, and I do it for Scott. Because he would, I mean, we make jokes. My closest friends that I've been friends with for 30 years that loved Scott, and he was a character, funny and silly, and played practical jokes on everybody. And, we say, like, Scott would be in heaven going, oh, yeah, I think he's got another one. Like, ha ha, look what we've been able to do and the people we've been able to help. And we make jokes about it. That might sound weird to some people, but that's who he was and what he wanted in his own life. And so if his death could be used for good in that way, because what else good can come from it?
It's
I
a way
mean,
to let your legacy live on.
right, right. And he would be proud of that and he would be happy. And um, so, you know, you see people like Holly Dunn. I mean, and she opened up, you know, Holly's house and is there for victims. And there's so much good. This woman I just told you about lost her daughter. She's already joined Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And, there's things she's doing. She's already starting to speak places. And I mean, it's only been maybe a year for her. And I'm like, wow, I couldn't do that much at a year. And she's bringing good from it. And I'm so proud of her for that. And I think it will help her in her healing process. And
Right. And it sounds like, that's what you're doing now. You're telling your story, you're healing. I really do hope you write your book someday.
I know I'm going to. I think about it more and more, and I'm just going to start devoting the time to do it, and I want to. I mean,
You better
I'll
let
have
us
more
know when you
confidence.
do.
You're such
Huh?
a comforting person.
I'm such a what?
A comforting person. Like there's just
Oh, well,
like
thank you.
there's like just something about you that I don't know, like talking to you, even though it's not about a pause. I don't know. It's just you make people feel good, and I think that's what, like Naoka said about you. She was like, she's just so sweet. There's just something about you.
Mm-hmm.
So I think
Oh,
it's
thank
awesome
you.
that you share that with people.
I felt like we were good friends after the first time we talked on the phone, Vikki.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and I love making new friends, so that's easy for me. And maybe that's part of the tragedy, y'all. Maybe you go through something that horrific that I think you look at things in life differently. You look at how much time you have left. You look at what you want to do with the rest of your life. Maybe a legacy. You look at, don't sweat the small stuff. I mean, when you go through something that bad, you can look at other stuff and be like, huh, that's nothing, So maybe that's what that is. I don't know.
Yeah.
But and I do. I mean, if I could have every day, my message could change. I could literally have a message every day that I would want to say to people. But today, and I don't know why I'm so focused on it today. I guess because, like I said, watching all this stuff on the Idaho murders is I would just, and even young people. Not that older people don't do it, but my youngest daughter is a big TikTok fan, and she's watching it all on there. And I've just had to encouraged her, please be careful what you say and don't post things on there because it's so, you said it so right earlier that it's too easy to not look at these people as real people.
Right.
Um, and
Mhm.
they are, and that's just horrific. And I thought about it for days, and I don't want to say it like, I don't feel like, because some people say, well, you shouldn't watch that stuff if it's a trauma trigger. Realize the evil that can be in this world and the pain that people go through and how you even survive, like how that girl survived that. I have no idea. But you guys just sharing that, at least that can make people stop and think like this stuff really does happen. It's not just TV. It's the
Mm-mm.
real deal. It really happens. So one, we need to be alert and know our surroundings and know people and protect ourselves, teach other people that, when I was 19, I didn't think about stuff like that. And,
No.
we
None
both
of
said
us
we have
do.
parents, huh?
None of us do.
No. I mean, you think you're invincible. And even though I grew up with a cop that was warning me all the time, I didn't listen. So, so I think it helps bring awareness. It helps maybe us to be sensitive to those things. But it helps us learn about survival that, when we think maybe we're going through something that's just awful or we can't get over or we have a bad day at work. Not that you still can't have those, and I have them too, but just know that there's we can have it pretty good. There's so much worse that can happen out there, and there's people that's been through so much and they've survived, and
Yeah.
even people that are suicidal or thinking they can't get through something and that taking their life is the only way out. If and I have a very close family member that attempted to do that, and thank goodness she's still here today, and we have pretty direct, blunt conversations about it. And I will say, if you had succeeded, you would not have seen this grandchild be born. You would not be living this moment right now. And I want her to continue to remember that in case she gets in that kind of depression again. But and she talks about how when you're in that moment and that deep in it, you don't see a way out. You think that that is the end to your pain. And I wasn't ever suicidal, but I was at times thinking, if I could die, if God would just take me, like if I had a heart attack or a wreck today, I would be released from this pain. So I had no plans of ever doing that to myself, but I felt like that was maybe the only way out.
Right.
But what if I had had plans like that, and here I am today, and when I've been able to raise my kids, and I have joy in my life, and I have friends, and I have fun, and I love music, and I go to concerts and festivals, and just I'm living life again. So if that message could get out to anybody is don't give up, tie a knot, hang on, you can get through it, and find the people that are going to help you get through it. That's important. Find your support systems. If you don't have any, or you're around toxic people that can't be that, then go find someone healthier for you, or get out of that situation. And because there's always hope, as long as there's breath in us, there's still hope.
That's
I
a
think
perfect.
I was getting ready to say the same thing, Rachel. Like that was perfect. Like you
Yeah.
couldn't have said it any better. You're right. I hope that we covered a lot of what people were curious about because this was fascinating. This side of like what you talked about today. I had no idea about most of it and or things I just didn't even think about.
And
I
I
do
think you
have one
ladies,
weird question.
yeah, yeah,
And this
yeah.
is probably just really weird, but I was thinking in your position and the house was a crime scene and you never wanted to go back to it and you're just waiting for the trial to be over or the hearings to be over so you can sell the house. Was the house difficult to sell with everybody knowing what happened?
I had a friend that used to be a realtor, and she's a close friend of mine. And she said, Vikki, I'll show your house. You won't have to go there. Don't get a realtor. We'll sell it we'll sell it ourselves, because I didn't have a lot of equity in the house. And I hadn't been in that house very long, and the market wasn't the greatest at that time. So I was worried, like, gosh, I'm gonna be upside down on this house. So she did help some, and then I got strong enough where, and I'm not good about asking for help. I'm not to this day. I'm kind of independent and stubborn that way. And so I would go myself and show it. And here's the deal. She's being a friend, looking out for me. She said, now, Vikki, you don't have to tell them what happened there if they don't know. And I said, well, I thought you have to reveal stuff like that. She's
Yeah.
like, no. She said, even realtors don't have to. She said, you have to reveal things like, if you had termites or, blah, blah, blah. She said, no, you don't have to reveal that. It's not a condition of the home or something's how she said it. So first couple of people I showed it to, they liked it. And I just have this guilt. Like, I got to tell them. And it just overwhelmed me. Like, it took me over. And I was like trying to talk myself out. Just like the day in the stores, I was like, no, I don't want to tell them. And then you have this other, like, yes, you should. And I did feel like it was just God saying, trust me, do the right thing. So one was a couple. She was pregnant. They was this cute young couple. It had a full finished basement. They wanted to make a den in the playroom for their new child. And I just thought they'd look so great in that house. And Scott and I loved this house. We were so proud of it when we found it. And we had made it a happy home, and we just loved it. And so I wanted to see this young couple with a baby. And then I'm watching her waddling around pregnant. And I thought, how would you feel, Vikki, if you bought this house and they didn't know? You could tell within minutes if someone knew or not. But say a friend knew, oh, you bought that house, that's where that guy. But this was several years later, a couple years later. And I was like, I don't want her to start out her life with her child like that. And her husband and her will be in the same bedroom where this happened. So I set them down. I still had living room furniture. I still had furniture in the house. I set them down and said, hey, I need to tell you something. And they looked scared, like I was going to say something bad about the house. But I told them what happened, and they looked shocked. And the husband said, well, I'm so sorry. Usually people were very sympathetic. I'm so sorry that happened to you. I didn't know that. Or somebody would say, oh, I do remember that. I didn't know this is the house, though. So the husband said, well, we really like the house, don't we, honey? And he looked at her, and she looked scared to death. And I thought, they're not going to get it. She's not going to get it. And they didn't. They called me the next day, and the husband said, man, I want that house bad, but I can't talk her into it. And he said, she's kind of freaked out by it. And I said, it's okay. I understand. And he said, I wish you didn't even tell her. And he kind of chuckled. I said, I couldn't. I get that. And if she would have found out later, you're right. That probably wasn't the best thing. So again, my friend was like, Vikki, you don't have to tell them. And I'm like, am I sabotaging this? So I would second guess myself. So a couple other people looked at it, went through the same kind of scenario. And I was kind of thinking, okay, Vikki, maybe you need to rethink this. The first time they looked at it, they had to leave hurriedly, and I didn't get a chance to tell them. And I really wasn't trying to avoid it. They got a call and had to leave. They said, we want to come back and look at it again and measure some things. They came back. So I thought, okay, here I go. I got to go through my drills, set them down in the living room like I did everybody else. And I told them. And the woman looks at her husband. She goes, and they were from the same county my husband's from, Ohio County, 30 minutes from Davis County. And she said, honey, you remember that man? He said, no, I don't remember this happening. She said, no, you remember that man, Scott Embry. He sang, and he would come sing at the Strawberry Festival in Ohio County, small little rural town. And you loved him. And he's the sweetest thing. And he'd talk. And we just said, he is the sweetest young man. And she just went, and he goes, oh, yeah. And so had one of his CDs. And they're just going back and forth. And I'm just sat there listening to it. And he was like, okay, so how do we draw the papers up? And I said,
Wow.
y'all going to buy it? I said, y'all going to buy the house? And they said, yeah. And I said, you're sure? Like, this doesn't bother you? And he made a joke like, you try and talk us out of it? I said, no, I just want to make sure y'all are good with it. And I always worried about the women because it seemed to be the women that bother more. And I looked at this woman and she just came over to the couch and she put her arm around me on my shoulder on one arm, and then she held my hand and she looked at my eyes. She said, honey, I'm not the least bit worried about buying this house. I'm looking at it. I'm going to live in a house of an angel because your husband had a voice like an angel.
Oh.
She said he had a voice like an angel, and he was so sweet, and we just could feel it in his spirit. And no, we are proud to be able to buy this house, and I knew they were going to be okay, and I wanted that house to have someone in it that would be joyful, and they just looked at it as it was a beautiful thing because it was Scott too. And I thought, my Lord, this man has even had an impact on these people. In the few times they heard his testimony, heard him sing, he had an impact on them that they're okay with buying this house, even knowing that happened to him there. So I believe it was meant to be. It was meant for them to have that house, and that it was the right thing to tell those other people because someone got the house that they were going to be okay with that. So
I am so glad I asked you this.
Funny you asked that question because I didn't even think about that story until you asked it. So see, you were supposed to ask that question.
I'm happy she asked it too. Like, oh.
Wow.
I know. And who would have thought out all the questions? And you're sitting there going, oh, that's a weird question. But seriously.
I almost didn't ask it. Like, I went back and forth in my head. I'm like, I'm just going to go for it.
Well, I can picture that lady like maybe like playing one of his songs in the house or.
I know. My oldest daughter has wanted to go back to the house. And I don't know if y'all like country at all, but Miranda Lambert has a country song about going back home to the house she grew up in. And it's got really pretty verses in it. And my daughter was like, Mom, I want to go. And I know if we went and knocked on the door, they would probably let us do it. I don't think I've really wanted to do it, but and she hasn't asked me a long time.
Oh, well, I cannot thank you enough for coming back on. And I think this one was even more emotional than the last one. Oh my gosh. You're making us cry over here, Vikki. Stop it.
Sorry. I want to thank you ladies for doing this because you have jobs and it takes time to do this, and here it is, 8:30 something your night, so kudos to y'all for doing this.
Thank you.
I mean,
thanks for reaching out.
Yeah, so good
we
for
appreciate
y'all.
you taking the time to do this with us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're the best, Vikki. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, so
and
y'all.
please stay in touch with us.
I know. Yes. I want to meet y'all in person sometime. We're going to have to plan that. So, yeah. I want to say, too, if it's okay, if people want to follow me on TikTok and you know that I haven't done the second video. I'm kind of new to TikTok, so I'm going to it's so hard because you only have a short amount of time to talk. And I know everybody does like a part 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, all that. Gosh, look at us. We've been here over an hour. I'm like, I don't know if TikTok's the platform for me because, it's how do you narrow all that down in little 3-minute segments. So,
yes.
But I am going to, and I've been following some other people on there that have been through similar things. And
is your name on there just at Vikki Embry or I can't remember. Okay. And
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
I was going to say, I will even include that in our show notes. So anybody listening that wants to follow you, I'll put your TikTok on there, your email address. That way, if somebody wants to reach out to you about anything,
we can share that on our Facebook and in our Operation Evil community as well.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And then
Yeah,
if you guys have questions or comments or want more of Vikki about another, subject, reach out to us. We'll reach out to her, whatever we need to do. Absolutely. All right. Thank you for all your time.
All right. Good night, ladies.
Good night. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. And I'll just close out here while Vikki is leaving. If you guys enjoyed this episode and you haven't listened to the other 2 episodes regarding Vikki's story and her husband's story, please go back, listen to that. If you have anyone out there that you know would want to share their own story, you can reach out to us on Facebook Messenger or on our email, operationevilpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to connect to you guys. And again, thank you to Tyson and Julie Hermes. We appreciate you very, very much. Am I missing anything, Rachel?
I think you got it covered.
Okay, that's fantastic. So thank you guys again. And until next time, goodbye.
Bye, everybody.